Welcome to the Faith Forum, a series of talks with leading thinkers, best-selling authors, business leaders, philosophers, artists, and theologians of our time. We're so happy you've joined us, and we hope this podcast offers food for your spiritual journey. From Christ Episcopal Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm the Reverend Chip Edens, and this is the Faith Forum.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone that's here in All Saints Hall. Good morning to everyone that's watching on our live stream on Facebook or on the app. It's a joy to be with you and a joy to be with these three up on stage. I'm going to keep my comments short here at the beginning because we have a really great conversation in store for all of you today. My name is Connor Gwynn. I'm the Associate Rector for Spiritual Wellbeing and Care here at Christ Church. If you've been here long, you know Christ Church is on a journey of wellness and well-being. Christ Church, for the last few years, has been looking at ways to invest in the well-being of our congregation and the well-being of Charlotte as a whole. It started with the hiring of a parish nurse, that kind of transitioned into a wellness director and a therapist on staff. As you all know her, she kind of makes this place run. Molly Ritz is absolutely incredible. But we found a problem really quickly when Molly started. She got too busy. Her schedule filled up with clients and with classes. And so we added a second wellness director, an assistant wellness director, Alex Bacon, who hit the ground running. And now she's running into the same issue. She is full. Her schedule's full. And so it's really led us at Christ Church to think about what are the next steps for well-being. One thing that churches do really well is triage and crisis care. So when something goes wrong in your life, the church is there. And I think we could go around and share stories of ways that the church has held you up in a moment of crisis. But the next frontier for Christ Church, for us as a parish, is going upstream. Y'all remember Lisa Miller was here last year? She wrote the book, The Awakened Brain. And she had a quote that we use a lot, that you should build the ark before it rains, which today is a really great image. You should build the ark before it rains. And so we're starting to think through what exactly that looks like for us at Christ Church. But before we get there, we wanted to have this conversation. I don't know how y'all receive wellness and well-being news, but I feel like I'm caught between two extremes. One is the headlines that I see that are always pretty terrifying, because I think that's how news operates. But you see the newest statistics, the newest figures about mental health, about mental well-being, and it gets pretty scary. And then on the other extreme, you hear the stories of your friends and your family. They kind of put some skin and bones on the statistics. This morning, what I want to do with my friends up here on stage is to kind of meet in the middle a little bit and to hear what three organizations in Charlotte are doing for well-being, what they're seeing on the ground, what life is like in these facilities and these organizations that are caring for people in varying levels of crisis. And then, spoiler, I'll tell you how we're going to end this conversation, is what can we do as a parish community upstream to help people before they get to the crisis that brings them to these folks here. So I think that's a good place for me to stop and to turn it over to our guests. So we'll start with some introductions. We have Charles Odell, who's the CEO and president of the Dilworth Center. Charles, can you tell us about yourself and about the Dilworth Center?
Glad to, Connor. It's a pleasure to be here. See a lot of friends here today, and Christ Church has been a part of my life and my family's life for many years. My kids grew up in this church, and I got a big soft spot for it. I run the Dilworth Center, which is a nonprofit substance use disorder treatment program here in Charlotte. We're coming up on 34 years of providing services to the Charlotte area. I've been with Dilworth close to 30 years now. I say stuff like that, it makes me feel like a dinosaur, but I'm still here, so that's good. We provide treatment services for different age groups. We have separate programming for adults, young adults, as well as adolescents. We do a lot of family work. We do specialty services for what we refer to as impaired professionals. We work with pilots. We've had a program that we worked with the FAA with pilots for many years, nurses, doctors. And, you know, it's just, it's tough stuff right now, man. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and we're very full right now. We've got a lot of demand. We're living through unprecedented times, both in terms of treatment demand and the complications associated with the challenges that people face today in terms of the various drugs that are available, which are very, very different than when I was growing up. And of course, you know, coming out from the shadow of the pandemic, we're just seeing a lot of fallout from that across the board. All mental health care services are seeing that, and we can talk about that more as we go along, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Next, we have Crystal Emmerich, who is the founder and director of Brave Step.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me, and it's so great to share the stage with these three gentlemen. As Connor said, I am the founder of Brave Step. We are a nonprofit organization that tries to walk alongside survivors, loved ones in the community, all whom are impacted by sexual violence. I am walking proof. I was a survivor of multiple sexual violence accounts in my life, and when we started this organization, it was to be able to step into a much-needed space and give hope and eventual well-being. I'm not a fan of the word healing anymore, but a hope and well-being to survivors who are struggling with depression, struggling with anxiety, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, mental health issues. It's a very, very difficult journey, and often they have to walk it alone. So we are stepping in that space to walk with them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
And we have Dr. Kevin Mara, who's the Director of Medical Services at Hopeway.
Thank you guys for having me. For those of you who don't know about Hopeway, we are a mental health facility right here in Charlotte, founded by members of this congregation. We treat adults currently with mental health issues primarily, but we do have about, I'd say, two-thirds of folks that have co-occurring substance use problems. We have a range of services. We treat people in our residential center, and that is 24/7 with nursing care. We treat people in a partial hospitalization program where they come kind of like a school day, if you will, from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, and then go home Monday through Friday. And then we have an intensive outpatient program, which is 3 half days a week. We have a clinic where we see people on an outpatient basis for medication management. And we just, in the past year, partnered with a couple of local free clinics here in Charlotte and are providing medication management embedded in their family clinics. And so what we do is pretty unique. We're the only folks around here in this state and the neighboring states, quite frankly, that are doing this kind of work. We're very heavily focused on psychotherapy in addition to medications, and we are a behavioral health home. That means that we do all of their primary medical care as well. We have networks to refer people out to manage their medical problems. It's just a fantastic place to work and a great resource for the community. We have sort of a holistic approach, so we do traditional psychotherapy, and then we also do integrative therapies. We have horticulture, we have a cooking class, nutrition, we have pet therapy, we have recreational therapy, we have music therapy, spiritual meditation, yoga, and so we kind of hit all angles, and just happy to be here and be a part of this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So the bulk of our conversation is going to be about what y'all are seeing on the ground, because and everyone kind of, it's unclear how to say, because we're not out of the pandemic yet, but we're coming out of the pandemic. And I don't know, do y'all remember at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone started their new hobbies in the pandemic, and you started your goal, and it was like, we're just going to do this for a month, and I'm going to come out having read all the books I want to read and, like, you know, do all that. Well, I don't think that worked out for many people. As the pandemic went on and kind of went on longer and longer, I think what we all realized is that no one handled it really well. I don't think anyone thrived in the pandemic. There's a few people who got to travel a little more and got to, I don't know, see family and things like that, but I think we all got out of the pandemic a little shell-shocked, a little dazed at what we've been through. And something we've seen at the church, and this is where I want to start with y'all, is what we saw is people emerging out of the pandemic in crisis, basically. That a lot of the problems that were kind of simmering under the surface before the pandemic exploded when the pandemic went on. One thing, and we don't need to go around and share about this, but one thing that we saw really frequently was couples who had kind of masked relational issues in the busyness of life. Suddenly, when the schedule got wiped clean and you're just at home with your person, it became an issue. And there's the lighthearted side of that where you just argued a little more, but it also became an issue for a lot of people who had very dysfunctional relationships. So I say all that as an intro, and I wonder if we can start with you, Charles. What are you seeing on the ground at Dilworth Center, and how is it different than prior to the pandemic?
Well, there's no shortage of folks suffering from substance use disorders, alcoholism, drug addiction. You can pick up the headlines just about any day, and you always hear about stuff like fentanyl and overdoses, and all those things are true, but you know, the number one drug of abuse and addiction in our society is and remains and always has been alcohol. And what we're seeing, if you look at the numbers, it's about 1 in 3 families in our community has an alcoholic in that family. Now, that may sound excessive, but you know, you're talking extended families. It can go back a ways. But this is something that everybody sees, whether you recognize it as being alcoholism or addiction or not. I mean, everybody sees the fallout from it. Everybody feels it. And what happened during the pandemic, what we're seeing is the isolation that people experienced has really complicated everything. And when they have come out to breathe air again in the community, what we're seeing is that they're sicker than they used to be. There are more complications than there used to be. Furthermore, they seem to be waiting till the last minute to ask for help. And so by the time they get to us, they're really in a crisis situation. It demands a very wide net of coordinated care, not just in terms of substance use disorder treatment, but mental health care services as well, which we provide. But it's challenging. It really is an all hands on deck situation right now. We're not laying people off, we're hiring them. We've got a very dedicated team. I mean, more than half of our people have been with us 10 years or longer, but we're seeing an escalation in demand. With the kids, what we're seeing, adolescents with problems, look, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the availability of the different substances right now, but you know, when I was growing up in the 60s, you smoked pot or you drank or dropped LSD and maybe stole some pills out of your parents' medicine cabinet or something. I mean, it's completely different now. And what we're seeing now is the availability of nearly every drug imaginable that can be obtained online and delivered to your home. I mean, it's a completely different kettle of fish. And parents, grandparents who are intimidated or perhaps unaware of that kind of stuff, what you need to know, of course, is your kids are not. You know, they get it and they know how to use it. And it has complicated things, particularly during the pandemic when people are ordering these drugs online, you know, and they're just, there are no eyes on them when they're in isolation, not like they are in the community. So they can get away with more at home than they used to be able to get away with. And once they come out from under their rock and head back to work, getting out from virtual care, what you're seeing is folks in a world of hurt. The numbers are escalating, they're not declining, the complications are increasing.
I wonder, Crystal, what you're seeing.
Well, I kind of want to lay groundwork a little bit before I start. So if you don't know the statistics, they say 1 out of 4 women and 1 out of 6 men are sexually abused by the age of 18. Those are based on reported numbers, and 60% never report. So let's just go ahead and double those numbers for the sake of a good conversation. When the pandemic hit, those 25 to 50% of people who were survivors who had been masking, and I was a great masker when before I had come forward for help, those people began to be massively triggered because they were all of a sudden locked in their home and they had to deal with these internal demons. Of course, they weren't caused by themselves, but they had to come face to face when they were, in their home for 2+ years. Or some of the situations we saw, Connor, also had to do with people living in the home with their perpetrator, whether that was a brother, a dad, a stepdad. You guys the list goes on. And so the rate of requests for individual counseling in 3 months once the pandemic started, I think we jumped 70% in requests in 3 months. And we are a small nonprofit, so that was a huge, overwhelming experience for us that we were able to manage. But the rate of people seeking mental health care during the pandemic skyrocketed. Every therapist we know, and I'm sure you guys experienced the same thing, they were booked beyond belief. You could not get into a therapist because we were all having to deal with all of our issues. Sexual trauma, of course, being the one I most focus on. The thing we don't know coming out of the pandemic, though, and this is piggybacking a little bit on what Charles said, is that when all of these children were at home with their perpetrator, we still don't know exactly what that long-term consequence is going to look like. And so that's going to be something that will unfold in the next couple of years, I believe. But one of the things that we've also been seeing, and we don't treat children, we only treat adults, but we do support parents, is that in the school systems now, there is so much sexual trauma being undertaken against each other, to each other, enforcing other kids to do sexually oriented acts in the school system. And this is in elementary school. I have a 6-year-old, so this is a very disturbing conversation to have as a mom of a 6-year-old. So I think that the pandemic was awakening for a lot of people, and I think that it's so important that you guys take what we say as truth, and if you are parents, to really start looking into the lives that your children are leading, whether it's drugs or the sexual trauma, because again, speaking from experience, it is a lifelong journey once that has happened, with lots of issues, coping mechanism, unhealthy coping mechanisms, some of which I should have probably visited your center for when I was, so.
And Kevin, I wonder, same question to you. What are you seeing at Hopeway?
Yeah. We've seen a couple interesting things. Some things we predicted and some things we didn't. I think one of the most interesting things to start off with is the folks that were already in treatment or had already been diagnosed and in various stages of recovery actually did pretty well in the first part of the pandemic. Okay. They had dealt with isolation before. They dealt with adversity. They knew they had skills. They had tools. We saw a lot of people on the flip side that had the simmering illness or sort of that vulnerability, and then the stress of the pandemic and everything that comes along with it really exacerbated and brought that out. And so similar to what Charles said, it looks like it's a new onset of an illness, but it really has been there. It had been there. So the other things that we're seeing is the severity of illness is much, much worse. The acuity of the people that we see is much higher. We have, not only in Hopeway, but outside of Hopeway, we have a huge crisis of people who cannot get into treatment. And they're sitting in your emergency rooms in Charlotte, outside of Charlotte. They're being shipped off to various hospitals within the state, anybody who has a bed. And so it's been really challenging. One of the reasons that we developed, and this was in the middle of the pandemic, we launched it, developed our clinic to treat people who on an ongoing basis, is because we couldn't find people to refer them to after we got done treating them. We would have a 4 and 6 week wait list for someone who just got out of a 24/7 facility, and that's not reasonable. And so there's a shortage, I would say, for psychiatrists. We're the oldest we have the oldest population in medicine. I think close to half of our folks are over the age of 55, and so in the next decade, we're going to see a huge shortage. It's going to get worse. So, fortunately, the medical schools are doing some work to, I think, really open more residency spots and things like that. But not too surprising, some of what we saw. But to speak to Charles's comment about the young folks, we've seen an uptick in young folks using cannabis-related products. I've done a little bit of research on some of these emerging ones that have come out in the last year or so, Delta 8 and some other things that you can get right up the street at the vape shop that are very, very psychoactive and cause some significant mental health conditions requiring hospitalization. So it's quite a new territory, if you will, from what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing, from each of you, it seems like mental health crisis, sexual abuse, and substance abuse all kind of thrive in isolation and in darkness. And that was the pandemic. I think we're only now, like you said, seeing the real impact of what that was. Because again, we get the picture of people enjoying their mountain home during the pandemic with their feet up. And I think that was the story for a lot of people. Yeah. But if you were already living in a pretty terrible place, the pandemic just pushed you even further.
Connor, one of the things that just occurred to me, and you all may not be familiar with this, but recovery is real. People recover from this stuff. This is not a hopeless state of mind, body, and spirit. It can be dark and it can be a crisis, but people get well every day. I'm in recovery from alcoholism and addiction. Most of y'all who know me know that. I'm pretty open about my own personal experiences, but I got sober in 1982. And if you go back to 1982, you'll see that there were 82 Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in Charlotte in 1982. I remember that, 82 and 82. Today, there are over 1,000 a week.
Wow.
Now, those meetings only grow for one reason: demand. And so what that means is there are a lot of people in recovery. And when you start talking about what you can do, maybe I'm jumping ahead to what Connor was talking about, was going to be one of the last things discussed. But, what can you do about it? And Connor's absolutely right. This stuff thrives in darkness and secrecy. An alcoholic alone is in bad company, You got to give each other permission to talk about this stuff. We're up here talking about it. You all need to talk about it too. Pick up the phone, call me, talk about it, because that's how people find what they need. Every situation's different. But if God had meant for me to be alone, he wouldn't have made all the rest of you, right? We're all in this together. And if we reach out and help one another, and what a perfect community to do that in, what you're going to find is the solutions will appear. And that's the good news.
Yeah. And that's this the goal of this forum was not to have you all leave here thinking, wow, the world is terrible. Everything's falling apart. So we're going to end on some really positive news. But I wonder, Kevin, you mentioned some of the positives that came out of the pandemic. And I know I've heard Charles talk about some of the positives of virtual treatment, meaning that there was no excuse not to attend treatment or go to a meeting because it was on Zoom in your pocket. So you could be sitting in the parking lot of the ABC store thinking about a drink and attend a meeting instead on your phone. And so I wonder if there are any kind of stories of success through the pandemic, or the availability of services or the availability of help you could share.
Yeah, so the virtual services have been a blessing. They're no replacement for in-person, but when there's no in-person, they're better than nothing, and they really connect you. And so one of the things that we did pretty quickly is we shifted our intensive outpatient program and our partial hospitalization programs to virtual, so people could attend from their home. And by doing that, we could treat people in the state of North Carolina. We can treat people anywhere. And so we had a lot of people from the East Coast that there's not very many mental health services there. And so we had a lot of people attending our programs from the coast, which was really nice. We were able to kind of keep in touch, and I've treated people, and it took a whole year before I met them in person, but I was able to sort of take care of them. So there are a lot of success stories. I'll tell you that the demand for that is actually going down because people do want to get back into in-person stuff. And so we've seen a trend in that respect. People who really took advantage of the virtual programs, but they really want to be in person, and so do we.
I can piggyback. The virtual was amazing, and I don't know about all of you, but I was adamant I did not want to do Zoom calls and Teams calls and have your face on this big screen, but we all got used to it, right? But it was great. We were able to pivot very quickly, thanks to virtual capacity, to be able to offer services to people, again, in isolation. And it was amazing. I thought, prior to the pandemic, that people wouldn't want to participate, but we found an upsurge in people wanting so desperately to be able to get services. And for a survivor of sexual trauma, walking up to that door, your first session, or picking up the phone for that first session, is one of the hardest steps you'll ever take. And to be able to do it in the comfort of your home with a little bit of separation, that screen creates some nice comfort zone for some of our survivors that, for us, we still are seeing about 50-50. So 50% want to come back and be in person and have community, and the other 50% are like, I like this Teams thing or this, Zoom. So it's been such a tremendous gift that we didn't really miss a beat in being able to continue our services. But there's still so much more we need to do to address this issue.
Virtual, love it or hate it. I mean, I kind of got tired of the screen, but I will tell you, we transitioned to virtual care in our program very, very quickly. I think we did it within a 48-hour period. I guess necessity is the mother of invention. Nobody really knew what to do. And transitioned very fast. We do very in-depth and thorough outcome evaluations at Dilworth. We do a lot of internal research about what goes on during treatment and success rates thereafter. And what we found was a little surprising to me. First of all, the success rates of folks who went through virtual care. Success is defined by maintaining abstinence for a period of time post-discharge, as well as retention rates, meaning that people who start treatment stay in it and complete it. Both those numbers for virtual care were just as high, if not higher, than face-to-face treatment. We found that virtual care worked, and that was, nobody had ever done that before. There no research on it, to my knowledge, at least not in substance use disorder treatment. I'm on the board of directors of a organization called the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. We represent over 1,500 treatment centers throughout North America, and what we found through the organization is that virtual care was working around the country very well. Interestingly to me, once people came back to face-to-face treatment, what we found when we surveyed those people and asked them which one did they prefer. These are people who had experienced both, some virtual care, some face-to-face. Which one did they prefer? What do you think the answer was? Face-to-face. 100% of the people we surveyed said they preferred face-to-face. That's very interesting to me. But, I mean, we still do some virtual work. I mean, the silver lining is you can work with people outside the Charlotte area, you know. So we have family members who tune in from Tennessee and Europe and, you know, all over the place to support their loved ones in treatment. And that's a really positive thing. So in terms of service delivery, I think what we have found is that the pandemic broadened our ability to provide care. And that's something we really did not expect going into it.
Connor, if I could piggyback, one of the things that I think Charles just mentioned that is so important for all three of us is, excuse me, is the importance of family involved in this conversation. I think that, at least, again, speaking from the area of my knowledge, sexual trauma lives and breeds and grows in isolation. And oftentimes a survivor is all by his or herself trying to deal with this beast. And it is truly a beast. One of our therapists on our advisory board, she says sexual trauma is like mold in a basement. If it's left unattended, it will take over the house. But I also think that extends to the family and to the community. The problem is, I believe, at least in our situation, families and allies don't know how to stand in that space. They don't know how to hold space. Part of it's because it's mental, right? The physical stuff heals. The physical stuff kind of moves forward, but it's the mental anguish that is very hard to measure and it's very hard to explain. And the pandemic gave us a chance to we've created a program specifically for loved ones and allies to teach them how to stand in that space so that survivor's not walking all by his or herself on this horrific journey.
I echo that. You know, when you have a conversation with a family and the patient, you're modeling for them how to have that conversation, and it's so important. And one thing that we've noticed, we do treat people from well outside of the Charlotte area as well. I think we've had people from 39 states come to Hopeway, but before the pandemic, family members that were on the West Coast or up north or anything like that, they couldn't come down here. Now they can. On Zoom. The last comment I'll say about virtual stuff is the no-show rate really plummeted because you can call someone up and poof, they're there. You can't do that. You can't do that in the clinic. But if you're 5 minutes late to my session, I'm giving you a ring, and you're usually able to produce them. So,
family work is so important. I mean, at Dilworth, I was talking to Connor right before this. I mean, we don't charge anything for family work. I think it's one of the best things we do, just to put a plug in for a shameless plug, sorry. But we don't want family participation to be a barrier to care. And so we attempt to reduce that barrier by providing family services free of charge over months and months of time. But, you know, the other thing I'll make mention about families, when people call us, usually it's a family member calling. It's not the individual asking for help who needs treatment. It's a family member reaching out for someone in their family. And I saw Joanne, I know she's here somewhere. She came up and said hello to me, one of my colleagues. But you know, family system, it's like a mobile in balance, right? So you have the alcoholic or the addict, and their behavior affects everybody in the family, whether they realize it or not. Well, conversely, family members can affect the alcoholic or addict as well. And oftentimes they're the first ones to make a change. And that change starts with picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, there's something wrong here. I don't even know. Half the time they call us, they don't even know what it is. I mean, they're calling us, obviously, we're a substance use disorder treatment program. But part of them, you'll hear them say, well, I don't think they really are alcoholic, but they're drinking, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And I understand that. I get it, Recovery is not a process. I mean, it's not an event. It's a process. And just like layers of the onion comes off, you got to start somewhere. And oftentimes the best place to start is with families reaching out and asking for help first. And then we can kind of guide them and get them directionalized where they need to be. But it's very important.
Well, that's a great segue to the kind of last thing I want to talk about, and this is what I hope you're all doing here, is to learn what we can do. Because to get to each of your organizations, it's not the end point, but it's someone's pretty far along in whatever their process is to pick up the phone or to show up to treatment. And so I wonder for us as a faith community, because if you heard those statistics, that means you know and probably love an alcoholic or an addict. You know and probably love someone who's been the victim of sexual trauma. You know and love someone who has a mental health, either diagnosed or undiagnosed situation. And so I wonder if we can just talk about what we can do as a community upstream to help people. Definitely referring people to you now that we know all the wonderful things you do. But I wonder if you can build that picture for us.
I guess I can start. It starts by having a conversation, being attentive to people around you, asking them how they're doing, legitimately asking them how they're doing, educating yourself about maybe what depression or anxiety or something like that looks like. There's also a lot of brain science about things like gratitude and diet and exercise. And we all know that you exercise, you get endorphins, that's helpful. Eating healthy, having good gut health, spiritual meditation, all these things have evidence that it actually does create a change in your brain. And so you want to take care of yourself in that respect. So we always talk about good sleep. We always talk about exercise. We always talk about socialization. We always talk about making sure that you're doing something to take care of yourself. So that would be an important piece to encourage everyone to do. And, just being, I think the more you're educated about what to look for and being able to have conversations and have your finger on the pulse of what the person around you is feeling and yourself, the better off you're going to catch it before it turns into something that's a problem.
So I like to use this acronym ACT, A-C-T. So acknowledge and educate is my first one. So acknowledge, you have to acknowledge that this is a real issue, that this happens to all genders, all races, all religions, all ages, all socioeconomic statuses. It does not care where you live or what you do. So acknowledging the truth of sexual trauma, that it is invasive in our community. Educating, as Kevin said, I think that is critical. If you don't, you're sticking your head in the sand, and the next thing you know, your child's going to be telling you something's happened, and then it's too late. I mean, you can get help, but it's still too late to prevent it. And education can also be good touches and bad touches. Talking to your children about saying no to hugs. If creepy Uncle Willie wants to give them a hug, they have every ability and opportunity to say no, but you have to empower them. So acknowledge and educate. And then C is confide and comfort. So if you're a survivor, I always say, please get help. Again, it's mold in a basement. And then if you're a loved one, learn how to comfort them, like to truly comfort them. You don't have to settle or solve all of their issues, but to truly be there and hold space with them. And then, T, I always say is talk to an expert, because this is too big. It's too complex to do it alone, and we all need a village. So ACT, if you need to remember that for later.
Christ Church has always been really good at providing educational opportunities about addiction, getting speakers in. And, I remember when I was very young, I had a great aunt. We used to go over to her house for the holidays periodically growing up, and I remember her saying something that struck me. I don't know why I remember this, but something came up about somebody having cancer, and she looked at me and she said, "Honey, good families don't get cancer." And I thought, "Oh, whoa, okay, well, if you say so." I mean, I was just a kid, But fast forward, she was from a different generation, but closer to home, I mean, I had family members who were alcoholic, and I remember members of my family saying good families don't get alcoholism, And of course, I've probably read everything you can read about alcoholism and addiction over the years. My wife says I'm a plethora of trivial information, which may or may not be of any interest to anybody. We know more about alcoholism and addiction than we've ever known before. And you can't get in a room of healthcare providers who know anything about addiction without the conversation turning towards addiction as a brain disease. That the brains of alcoholics and addicts react differently to these substances than the brains of normal people. A simplistic way to look at it is it's an allergy. Allergies don't come in substances, they come in people. Either I have the abnormal reaction or I don't. We have to begin to understand and internalize that alcoholics and addicts are not bad people who need to get good. They're sick people who need to get well, and they deserve to be treated with the same dignity and quality of care as anyone suffering from any other disease. And those of us who work in this business live by that. But I think a lot of times people, because of silence, they'll start taking on all this guilt and shame that perhaps is excessive baggage preventing them from doing what they need to do, which is reaching out for help. But creating an atmosphere in which recovery is encouraged and that you have permission to talk about this stuff and get your questions answered, that's what an organization like Christ Church can excel in and does, providing that opportunity for discussion. You air this stuff out and you'll kill it off. You got to acknowledge and give yourself permission to talk about it, though.
Yeah. Well, Crystal, I don't know if you know, but we refer to Christ Church as a spiritual home. Yeah. And I just love that image of mold in the basement that needs light. Yeah. And I think that's one thing we're doing with our wellness and well-being work here in our spiritual home. Something I think, and this is true of a lot of different issues, not just the ones y'all deal with, but something I'd encourage you to do is we all get the gut feeling when we're talking with someone or someone's sharing or we're noticing a trend in someone's behavior and maybe someone's getting a little more isolated or their patterns of behavior are changing. I don't know, we've all felt that feeling. And so I think my advice, kind of bringing all this together, would be when you feel that, act on it, do something. Because the worst case scenario is someone sees that you're a really caring person who wants to make sure they're okay. If that's the worst case, I'll take that. And then the best case is you speak up and you ask, how are you really? What's really going on? I haven't seen you at church in a while. I haven't seen you doing this thing that used to give you so much joy. There's all these little indicators that we get in community with each other. So I think that's a place to speak up. Because I know, and I'll use a trivial example, I know when you come to church, you think you're the only one dealing with anything at all. But it's like being the parent of a young child in church. And I know this from experience. You think your child is the loudest creature on God's green earth. And you think they're making a noise in the fifth pew back is disrupting worship for every single person in the room, and you just want to take them and go outside. And what you don't realize is it's actually not that big a deal. Generally, people actually like having kids in church. If your church isn't crying, it's dying. So, it's actually a good thing. But when you're in the moment, you think you're the only one, and no one understands, and no one has ever experienced the same thing you're experiencing. Or if your kid comes to church in two different shoes or something, you think you're the only person. But we need moments like this in community to say, no, you're not. Let your kid make noise. And again, that's a really trivial example, but no, you're not the only one who is an alcoholic or who loves an alcoholic. You're not the only one who's survived sexual trauma. You're not the only one dealing with a mental health diagnosis. We need to say it out loud, and then we can start believing it as the truth of our community.
Connor, I'd like to add something to what you said about following your gut feeling and asking. There's a common myth that's associated with asking someone about suicide, that would somehow give them the idea. It's been proven to be very, very false. It's very life-saving intervention. If you have a gut feeling that someone is struggling, directly asking them if they're having thoughts of self-harm or thoughts of suicide can be life-saving. And so that's something I always want to point out when I give a talk about this. And that's maybe not ending on a good note, but that's the reality of these illnesses that we treat, is that there is a mortality associated with them. So I would encourage you to kind of pay attention to your family members and your loved ones and ask them if you think there's something going on.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a good note, because that's hope. What you're asking the question is a door that someone can walk through if they're ready to do it. And it's one hard conversation that can save potentially a life.
Kevin and I were saying right before this too, we're all farmers. And I know that sounds weird, but we all plant seeds of hope and seeds of opportunity. And by asking, if you're concerned for someone that might have suicidal ideations, but by asking that, you're planting a seed of hope. And the same thing for alcoholism, drug abuse, sexual trauma, or mental health. But you have to be willing to plant that seed and then water it. You don't have to downpour it like we have today, but just water it ever so often so they know that you're an ally that they can lean on. I think if we can go with that farmer mentality of plant a seed, then great things can happen.
Well, it's a biblical image. Paul says in 1 Corinthians that we plant the seeds, God gives the growth. That our job is to open the door, plant the seed. And I think this is a good first step in a lot of that. So we're nearing the end of our time. I wonder if y'all have any final words of advice, hopes for the Christ Church community. I'm so grateful that y'all came to do this.
Certainly my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity. There is hope. I think we've mentioned that a number of times. I think, I'm a parent of two kids, and they're grown now, but, if you look at mental health, sexual trauma, substance use disorders, what you're looking at really is, in all likelihood, if you've got kids growing up, these are the most likely pitfalls. These are the things you got to worry about. You're looking at them, okay? Give yourselves permission to talk about this stuff, Pick up the phone, like I said, call me, call any of us. But talk amongst each other. And you're just in a wonderful environment in order to do that. And that's where it starts. In the old days, when you had a substance use disorder, it wasn't like breaking your foot, where it doesn't matter what your entry point in the healthcare system would be, whether it's minor emergency room, Ortho Carolina, whatever. Your foot's going to get set equally as well. In the past, that wasn't true with addiction. The quality of care that you would get would depend upon your entry point into the healthcare system and whoever you were talking to, whether or not they knew anything about it. No offense to doctors, but we used to say doctors suffered from the 4-2-1 syndrome, which is in 4 years of medical school, they received less than 2 hours of training on the nation's #1 health problem. That's not true anymore. Docs are pretty sharp, and a lot of counselors are pretty sharp. It's getting better and better and better. So your chances of having a successful outcome if you engage the system is really quite high. But, you got to be willing to roll up your sleeves. It's not easy. There's not a soft fix to all this,
Well, I'll kind of piggyback on that. I always think with sexual trauma, I have to make you uncomfortable to eventually get comfortable with this. You know, when I first started this work 8 years ago, I thought, man, I'm going to the churches. That's the place where this will, like, we can change lives, right? And I told Connor, I was so grateful that you all invited us in to talk about something so uncomfortable, but we're all part of the life transforming business, right? And I think where else are lives transformed than in the church? And that's what you guys are in the business of. And so if we can bring it all together so that transformation is both the good and the bad and the yucky and the great, and then lift it up, how much better will we be as a community and as a church and as individuals? So I applaud you for sitting here and listening to us, and thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll leave you with a simple challenge. You know, when you go home today, and maybe for the rest of this week, when you interact with people, ask them how they're doing. Or really, how are you doing? Get to know them, get to know what's going on in their life. We all want to kind of talk about the news and superficial things, and you know, we don't really ask people how they're doing on a deeper level. So I would encourage everybody to do that with people around them. You'll find out a lot, and you'll also create kind of a pattern or a habit of doing that where they feel comfortable sharing that with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, let's give a round of applause for these three. And they're going to stick around for just a few minutes up here, and then they're going to head to the Good News Cafe so that the Discovery Service can get going here. So if you want to shake their hand and thank them or ask some questions, they'll be around. But please know their websites are great. They have all the information you need. And we're going to be partnering with them hopefully more in the future as we build our wellness ministries. One thing we've talked about is doing some Dilworth Center assessments, addiction assessments here through our counselors and things like that. So stay tuned as we partner more and more with these organizations. But I think a good place to end would be to close in prayer. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the chance to gather together to have hard conversations about real things. Please give us the grace to plant the seeds of hope in the lives of those we meet, the lives of those we love. And if we are struggling, Lord, if we're sitting here right now and we've heard a glimpse of our story, the ways that we're struggling, give us the courage to reach out and ask for help. I ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right, thanks y'all so much.
Thank you for listening. We invite you to subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and connect with Christ Church Charlotte on social media. If you'd like to attend a Faith Forum live, visit christchurchcharlotte.org/Faith Forum to view dates and details of upcoming talks.